Hi, it's Katrina. When empires clashed and civilizations crumbled, where did all the people go? The answer lies in the shadows, hidden in plain sight. Let's check out the incredible ingenuity of ancient people who built secret hideaways to defy their conquerors. Today's video is all about ancient hiding places. Grand Canyon Caves. People have been living in the Grand Canyon for at least 12,000 years. Few people know that the Grand Canyon Park has recorded over 4,300 archaeological resources inside only 5% of the park's area. There are caves in the park where people used to live. Finding that much in such a small percentage of the park is crazy. Imagine what archaeologists might find if they did an intensive survey of the other 95% of the Grand Canyon. There isn't just one culture that called the Grand Canyon home. America's greatest fissure in the earth has been home to 11 tribes and historic ethnic groups over the millennia, including the well-known Southern Paiute, Zuni, Navajo, and ancestral Puebloan, and the lesser-known basket maker culture, Serbat, Pai, and Kohonina. The people who first arrived in the canyon at the end of the Ice Age did so in small bands of hunters. They feasted on mountain goats, ate ground sloths, and harvested plants. It's hard to picture today, but the first people in the Grand Canyon had a natural buffet on their hands. Then things started to change. It began to get warm, and the hunters took to stalking small game as it migrated across the landscape. Archaeologists have found camps, cave shelters, abandoned fire pits, and processing areas littered with organic remains and rock tools. That era of the canyon's history lasted from about 9000 BC to 3500 BC. Then came the corn cultures. People figured out how to grow maize, and it was a game changer. Civilization began to adopt a lazier lifestyle. I'm sure we've all done that at some point in our lives. 5,500 years ago, they began building granaries and more permanent structures. Farming allowed them to stay in the canyon instead of chasing animals across the southwest. Kind of like how streaming allows us to stay at home and eat popcorn instead of going to the movies. For the next 4,000 years, the people of the Grand Canyon slowly became civilized. Villages popped up, people figured out how to make baskets and clothing. By 500 AD, pit houses had appeared, and they were making jars and bowls. Everything was going up and up, with the people of the canyon building epic stone homes in cavern outcrops. And then it all fell apart. By 950 AD, there were pueblos along just about every ridge and hilltop. Then, in 1150, the ancient Pueblo people moved away from their ridge dwellings and started building cliff dwellings. This wasn't just in the Grand Canyon. It was across the entire American Southwest in the Four Corners region. Something changed that made these people start living in the nooks and crannies of cliffs. By 1300, pretty much every single place was empty. Nobody knows what happened, but it looks like the whole civilization collapsed. The various tribes picked up and fled to parts unknown. It's one of America's greatest historical mysteries. What were they afraid of? What forced the ancient tribes into the shadows? I want to read your theories in the comments. By the way, you can visit some of the caves that may have been used as shelters by the ancient people centuries ago, like the Grand Canyon Caverns, 210 feet below the surface of the planet. They were found in 1927 by a guy on his way to play poker with some friends. Walter Peck was walking to a party when he almost fell into a pit. The next morning, he and his friends went to inspect the pit. With a coal oil lantern lowered into the hole, they saw gold glimmering on the walls. Walter thought he had stumbled upon gold, so he purchased 800 acres of land. That was how easy it was to be a landowner in the 1920s. But talk about a bad purchase. It wasn't gold at all. The hole was covered in iron oxide. Walter Peck was in danger of going broke. He tried to turn it into a tourist attraction by charging people 25 cents to enter. Then, in 1962, the government filled the caverns with food and water enough for 2,000 people to live for 2 weeks. It was the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and everyone was terrified of atomic war. The supplies are still in the caves today. Have you ever visited them? Let us know your experience in the comments. Look out for the Mongolians. The Romans weren't the only ones that people hid inside caves to avoid. In the Middle Ages, villagers in Turkey fled into a vast underground city to hide from the rampaging Mongolians. Then the city was lost, buried underneath Turkey for decades. The city was accidentally found during a home renovation in 1963. This is the miraculous underground city of Kuyu, as tall as a 25-story building, only it's underground. It was big enough to house 20,000 people, plus a variety of livestock. The underground city could have been filled with cows and chickens and some horses too at the stables. This place is impressive. It's also surprisingly inviting. It actually seems like a great place to live, assuming you have some vitamin D tablets. There's no sun in Kuyu, but there is a sophisticated ventilation system. The city had access to fresh water and fresh air, allowing people to live in its caverns and dark chambers full-time. And since they were buried dozens of feet beneath the surface, passing armies didn't even know they were there. Even if an army did know about the city, defending it was a piece of cake. With only a handful of entrances, more than 50 ventilation shafts, and 20,000 people, there was no way inside. City residents could block off the entrances, sealing themselves in like trapping themselves inside a bank vault. You might be wondering why anyone would build an underground city in the first place. It probably wasn't for hiding, at least not in the beginning. Turkey's Cappadocia region, where Kuyu lies, is built on soft volcanic rock. The rock is tough but easy to carve out. It would have been easier to carve your home out of stone than to cut down trees and build a log cabin. The Phrygians of the 8th century BC were likely the first ones to build cave homes in this region of Turkey. There are over 200 underground cities in Cappadocia, representing a civilization of troglodytes. As the centuries passed, the cities only got more complex. What began as cave homes evolved into cave villages. When Christianity arrived, people started building chapels and churches underground. Kuyu was likely formed during the Byzantine era. When the Muslim Arabs went to war with Byzantium in 780 AD, Kuyu became a place of refuge for villagers who wanted nothing to do with the conflict. It remained in use for the next 300 years while war raged between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims. One war ended just for another war to begin. Christians thought they were finally done being persecuted, and then came the Mongolians in the 14th century. People rushed back into Kuyu as the Mongolian hordes swept across the land and burned down villages. The strife continued into modern times. Christians continued using the underground city as a safe haven when Turkish Muslim authorities took over during the Ottoman Empire. In the 20th century, Greeks sought shelter here as well because they were being persecuted. The tunnels weren't abandoned until around 1923. That's more than 1,000 years of fearful Christians using the tunnels to keep safe. And now for number 7, but first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Candy McGraw and Afraid of Human for supporting this channel. Thank you so much! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Labyrinth of Buddha Castle. You're not going to believe this next place is real, but it is, I promise. It seems like something out of a creepy medieval vampire movie. Deep underneath the thick stone walls of Buddha Castle is a labyrinth of dark and ominous tunnels. The castle stands proudly in the ancient district of Budapest, the largest city in Hungary. If you've ever been a tourist in this city, I almost guarantee that you have seen the castle. It's huge, dominating the hill like a sprawling fantasy palace above the Danube River. At night, the castle is lit up and hard to miss. It's glamorous at the surface and downright chilling underneath. Buddha Castle was built in the 13th century, but the tunnels beneath it date back much further. Evidence has been found that primitive Homo erectus occupied the tunnels 350,000 years ago. The underground caves weren't created by medieval peasants with chisels. They were carved from solid rock by thermal waters around 500,000 years ago, then taken over by our prehistoric ancestors. The tunnels are extensive, but not too extensive. There are about 4,000 feet of passages snaking like a labyrinth fit for a minotaur, 53 feet beneath the castle. Before Budapest was Budapest, it was the ancient Roman city of Aquincum. The surrounding area, including the neighboring town of Pest, was an important economic center up until the 13th century. In 1241, guess who showed up on their horses to sow destruction? That's right, it was the Mongols again. They destroyed Pest and left everything in ruins. In the years that followed, King Bela IV built Buda Castle so that they wouldn't have a repeat of the Mongol invasion. The underground caves were used for storing food and water. For hundreds of years, they were also used as hiding places when war broke out, or occasionally when the city caught on fire. The labyrinth also had a more nefarious purpose. When the Ottomans came to power, the underground labyrinth served as a prison and torture chamber. I told you things were going to get creepy. There is a rumor that Vlad Tepes, aka Vlad the Impaler, aka Dracula, was kept prisoner under Buda Castle in 1462. He was captured after being betrayed by Hungarian King Matatias, and he was imprisoned. After years of brutal torture, Vlad was released. But the horrors he had suffered, the unspeakable cruelty of it all, transformed him into a monster. He entered the underground prison as Vlad and left as the Impaler. There are still remnants of the dark days inside the labyrinth, such as iron bars stuck in the walls. But there are other things in there too, like the wine fountain, the bizarre humanoid statues that look like aliens, and the remnants of a Turkish harem. The underground tunnels continue to draw controversy to this day. In 2011, after years of being a major tourist attraction, Hungarian police stormed the caves. The cops removed everyone in them, closed the entrances, and forbade anyone from entering them again. And nobody has ever learned why. Do you know? Orvieto Underground. Orvieto in Italy is a dream come true. The city is a medieval marvel that makes you feel as if you're truly walking through the streets of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. But underneath the city, there is a totally different vibe. It's one that not everybody can handle. The thing about Orvieto is that it was built on top of a bluff. It offers amazing views of the surrounding area, but there isn't much space. They basically built their city on the pinpoint of a needle, so they didn't have much room to expand. When you can't expand outward, you expand downward. The people of Orvieto began burrowing underneath the streets as a way to grow and as a way to survive. Archaeological evidence suggests the city was built by the civilization that came before the Romans. The legendary Etruscans established Orvieto more than 2,500 years ago. Its high position was great for withstanding sieges, since climbing the steep slopes was a nightmare. But it was impossible to get water from the plains below all the way up to where Orvieto is perched on the bluff. Digging underneath the city allowed the Etruscans to expand and have easier access to water. They sank deep wells into their impregnable city and built special cisterns to collect rainwater. They didn't even need the fresh water from the plains. Soon enough, the Etruscans had what they believed to be an unconquerable city in the clouds. And it was, at least for a bit. When war broke out between the Etruscans and the Romans, Orvieto held its ground for a commendable amount of time. Romans laid siege to the city for 2 years, with the residents surviving thanks to their underground water wells. But they couldn't last forever. In 264 BC, Rome took the city and the Etruscans were absorbed into the Roman Republic. Over the next 2,000 years, construction continued, and the underground part of Orvieto became even more complex and amazing. Right now, there are around 1,200 structures underneath the city. It was a fully functioning part of Orvieto, but it was lost at some point after the Middle Ages. Part of the underground was buried and forgotten. It was gone for years until a landslide in the 1970s once more revealed it. The shocking history of priest holes. There was a time in England when it was so dangerous to be a priest that they had to hide in holes. Castles, palaces, and estates from the Tudor period are littered with secret hiding spots where priests avoided being executed. This crazy chapter in English history began in the late part of the 1500s. Europe was under control of the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican in Rome. The Pope was the unofficial leader of everyone. Even kings and queens had to bend their knees to God's holiest emissary. The Catholic Church had so much power that people started getting irritated. Protests against the Catholic Church led to the formation of the Protestants in Europe. At the same time in England, King Henry VIII was tired of being married to his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. It had been over 20 years together and he had no male heirs, so he wanted a divorce. But the Pope said no way, no divorce is allowed. Henry was not about to be bossed around by the Pope. He separated England from the Catholic Church, replacing it with the Church of England. He started his own branch of Christianity just so he could do whatever he wanted. It may not have been that bad if not for what happened after King Henry died. His son, Edward VI, helped turn England into a Protestant state. But after Edward's death, his sister Mary changed England back into a Catholic state. It was too much flip-flopping for the English people. They'd already become Protestant. Now they had to return to being Catholic. And Queen Mary was not cool with people practicing whichever religion they wanted. If people weren't going to give up their Protestant ways, they would be burned at the stake. After many years of brutality against the Protestants, Queen Mary was succeeded by her sister, Queen Elizabeth I. Yet again, the religious policy of England flip-flopped. Elizabeth restored Henry's original Church of England. Protestants were once again reinstated, while Catholics were fined, imprisoned, or killed. There were all kinds of plots by the Catholics to overthrow Queen Elizabeth. The rest of England wanted to place her cousin, the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, on the English throne. King Philip of Spain even sent the Spanish Armada to England in 1588 in an attempt to restore Catholicism. During all this turmoil, being a priest was bad business. Priest hunters were unleashed by the Protestant monarchy of England to hunt vigilante Catholic priests and end them. In 1540, the Catholic Church founded the Jesuit order. They were essentially elite priest ninjas. Jesuits were sent secretly across the English Channel to support Catholic families. And they were hunted down mercilessly by the priest hunters. This led to the creation of priest holes, cavities built into fireplaces, staircases, and attics. When the priest hunters came around to a wealthy estate, the Jesuits would hide in the holes and try not to make a sound. This was easier said than done. Priest hunters didn't mess around. If they had a strong suspicion that you were hiding a priest, they would sit around in your house for days. The priest hunters would wait for the priest to reveal himself or starve to death. The dragon legend of Selim Cave. There once was a mighty dragon that guarded the gold of a sultan who stashed his wealth in a Hungarian cave. At least that's what the legend says, but could it be true? In the 1930s, archaeologists excavated Selim Cave in hopes of uncovering the lost gold and jewels of the sultan, and maybe even some dragon bones. But they haven't found any riches yet. No gold, no treasure, nada. What archaeologists did find is something considerably more valuable. Selim Cave is 1,000 feet above a beautiful green valley, not far from the picturesque city of Tatabánya. Over the centuries, the cave was used by locals as an emergency shelter. According to Hungarian folklore, Sultan Selim Han invaded the region in the 1500s. The people from 7 neighboring villages fled the Turkish invaders and hid in Selim Cave. They thought they were safe. Then a young boy began to cry. His mother tried to keep him silent, but his screeching was enough to give away their positions. The Turkish soldiers lit fires at the entrance and blew the smoke into the cave. Everyone inside, 7 villages worth of people, died by carbon monoxide poisoning. It's believed this horrific slaughter was the inspiration for the story about the dragon and the Sultan's treasure, specifically the part about the smoke and the fire. When archaeologists started excavating the cavern in 1932, they found animal bones, human remains, and mysterious carvings. The artifacts were way older than the 1500s. The human bones and stone tools dated to about 50,000 years ago. The initial findings were made almost a century ago. In the years since, human occupation at the site has been pushed back to 200,000 years ago. There may not have been any dragons, but there were prehistoric hominids. The cave was declared a national asset by the Hungarian government in 2013. Investigations are still ongoing. This is the 8th wonder of the world. It's being called the 8th wonder of the world. The amazing cave cities of ancient Georgia are more impressive than any other place I've probably shown you today, yet few know they exist. A lot of people don't even know that Georgia is a country, not just a state in the USA. Often overlooked, the ancient cave cities of Georgia boast a unique history unlike any other place. Nestled within the country's dramatic landscapes, these remarkable settlements offer a glimpse into a bygone era. The rock monastery of Lavra dates to the 6th century AD. For the last 1400 years, monks have been living in the remote monastery amidst a barren wasteland of shrubs and rocky cliffs. The monks are still there today, still living like it's the Middle Ages. The Lavra Cave Sanctuary was established by Saint David Garielli, a figure steeped in mystery. David was supposedly one of the 13 original priests who arrived in Georgia from the Middle East with the Word of God. Nobody had heard about Christianity until he showed up and started preaching. Soon, David's cave monastery grew into the spiritual center of Georgia. Hundreds of cells were carved into this solid rock to create living quarters for the monks that were multiplying like rabbits. The dry, stuffy caves still have the original frescoes on them from when they were first made. The beautiful rock monastery is only one of many cave monasteries in Georgia. It all started at Lavra, but soon the culture of cave dwellings spread to the nearby mountains. A narrow footpath through rugged terrain links the abandoned caverns of a society of hermit monks. Most of the caverns are empty, sadly in terrible shape ever since the Soviet era. The Soviets incorporated the monasteries into military training exercises, using them for target practice. Only when Georgia regained its independence did the monasteries become holy places again. It started with 6 monks going on pilgrimage into the region, and now the monks are slowly returning to their old caves. I've left out one very important place though, and we just can't move on until I tell you about it. It's a place so far-flung and remote that you have to take a bus from Gori, the town Joseph Stalin was born in, to the village of Kafkavreli. From there, you have to walk down a winding path of dirt until you come upon a rock fortress that is 3,000 years old. This fortress doesn't have anything to do with the nearby cave monasteries. It's far older than them, its stones milky white, making it feel as if you're walking around a moon city. It's called Uplisike, one of the most important ancient cities in Georgian history, yet nobody knows exactly when it was founded. Experts have estimated it was built anywhere between 1000 and 600 BC. Other evidence suggests more prehistoric roots, with ancient people having perhaps lived in the area 17,000 years earlier. Regardless of how old it is, Uplisike was the religious capital of Georgia before Christianity arrived. Its inhabitants worshipped a sun goddess, though her name has been lost to history. The town isn't just above ground, but also below it. Passages link the buildings through twisting underground corridors. The underground portion of Uplisike may be the same size as Kuyu in Turkey. Estimates claim that it could have supported up to 20,000 people. The secret city under France. There are cave tunnels hidden underneath the rural French village of Naur, with a history spanning centuries and thousands of miles. This sprawling network of chambers and bat-crowded caverns date to the Middle Ages, but their walls are also covered in signatures of Austrian soldiers who used the caves during World War I. These caves are vast, spreading for miles like big hollow roots 100 feet beneath the surface. For hundreds of years, they were used by medieval villagers to store food or hide in times of war. The modern village of Naurs is only home to about 1,200 people right now. Its underground portion once hosted twice that number. The underground city began as a quarry at some unknown time in antiquity. Then, when the quarrying was done, the empty chambers gave locals a convenient place to hide from raiders. The lightless rooms became so popular that by the 17th century, people had started living in them full-time. There were 300 rooms and 28 galleries packed to the gills with around 3,000 people. The people built 3 chapels, barns for livestock, and a bakery, its chimneys routed through the chambers to the surface. The caves were never truly lost. They were forgotten about for a while, but in the 1800s, they turned into a tourist attraction. In World War I, when Austrian soldiers fought in the nearby trenches, a lot of them visited Naurs. There wasn't much else to do besides trying not to be killed. A few years ago, a local man named Mr. Prilot began studying the cave walls of Naur. There were a lot of markings on the walls, but he wasn't sure what any of it meant. Then he realized the markings were signatures, modern signatures. Mr. Prilot has now documented the signatures of roughly 2,000 Austrian soldiers. Some wrote, in addition to their signature, their battalion, their home address, and even their weight and height. For a lot of these soldiers, this was the last thing they ever wrote. Some of them undoubtedly died the day after leaving the graffiti on the walls of the ancient caverns. They had come to the end of the world and wanted to leave at least some trace of themselves behind. It might also be worth noting that the Nazis took over the ancient underground tunnels during World War II and used them as their local base of operations. Let's hope that evil never gets inside these tunnels again. Hiding at the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee has revealed ancient hiding places where Jewish villagers tried to remain safe from the brutal Romans 2,000 years ago. It was one of the most harrowing episodes in Jewish history, but it wouldn't be the last. Archaeologists have called a new discovery the most extensive hiding complex ever found in Galilee. These rooms were designed specifically to avoid the heavily armored Roman soldiers as they chased Jewish rebels through subterranean tunnels. Professor Yinon Shivtiel at the Zifat Academic College said the caves were not for living. These weren't extensive caverns where villagers could relocate for months at a time while avoiding persecution. They were made like a safe room in a house, to hide out for a few days in case of an emergency. In some of the cavities, archaeologists found evidence of people trying to stay alive. They found hundreds of broken dishes, both ceramic and glass. They found discarded utensils, evidence of food, and other random artifacts like lost rings. The way into these subterranean safe chambers was not easy. They were connected to villages on ground level through tunnels dug at 90 degrees. You had to be really scared for your life to crawl down into these things and hide in the dark with some meager rations for days at a time. These are not the only underground shelters around. They just happen to be the newest ones discovered. There are more than 83 underground shelters in the Galilee region, most of them dating from between 66 and 136 AD. 66 was the year the first Jewish-Roman war broke out. Although it's called a war, it wasn't much of one. The Romans already had wrestled sovereignty away from the Judeans. The war erupted when a group of Jewish rebels revolted against their Roman occupiers. The war lasted about 4 years, coming to an end with the utter defeat of the Jewish forces and the destruction of the Second Temple. It was a disaster for the Judeans, especially since the Second Temple was their holiest building. After a generation, the Jewish people tried again to get rid of the annoying Romans. The second rebellion is known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt, which broke out in 132 when the Romans amped up their suppression tactics. The Romans banned Jews from living in Jerusalem. The Second Roman-Jewish War lasted until 136 and ended with the same results as the First War. The Judeans were almost completely wiped out. As the Romans rampaged across the land that is now Israel, villagers hid in the caves and prayed that the Romans wouldn't find them. Ancient bunkers in India. 2 recently discovered caves in Jahanabad district in India have archaeologists pretty intrigued. Carved from rock roughly 2,400 years ago, these structures appear to have been used as shelters. There are several caves in the area carved from stone that date to the Mauryan Empire in 322 BC. Experts believe they were carved during the reign of India's most legendary ruler. His name was Emperor Ashoka, 3rd ruler of the Mauryan Empire. He's also known as Ashoka the Great, and not just anyone gets a great added onto their name. Ashoka was a major benefactor to Buddhism and a ruthless warlord. Ashoka enlarged his empire so that it took up almost the entire Indian subcontinent, stretching from the borders of Afghanistan all the way into Bangladesh. His devotion to Buddhism helped spread the religion across all of Asia. What I find amazing is that in the 19th century, Ashoka was a name that nobody knew. Even scholars in India had forgotten all about him. Nobody knew the greatest empire in Indian history existed. Then some Brahmi scripts were decoded and historians realized his importance. In the last century, as more ancient writings have been deciphered, the experts have learned a lot about his reign. But enough about Ashoka. Let's take a look at these supposed ancient shelters. The 2 artificial bunkers are 100% real. You can visit them for yourself if you happen to be in this rural part of India. On one hill is a cave called Karna Chowpar. Somebody blasted a small entrance into a rock and then hollowed out the inside. Archaeologists know how old it is because there is a faded inscription from 245 BC, just beside the entrance. 2 other bunkers were recently located in the area. Those who have seen them claim that the bunkers were carved with incredible precision. They were made with perfect cuts and impossible angles, the stones smooth as if burned away with a laser. Reports coming out of India claim the bunkers must have been made with sophisticated technology. But how is that possible? Mainstream scientists don't know what's going on here. The caves are real and they do appear to have been used as shelters. However, there is not much information on who built them, nor is there evidence of what advanced technology they used or what they were supposed to defend against. I should also mention that there are some conspiracy theorists out there who believe that these caves were once used as ancient nuclear war shelters. I've gone over this theory in recent videos, so if you haven't watched them, be sure to check them out. Would you live in a subterranean city with no light if given the chance? As long as it had internet, of course. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Secrets of Atlantis. Around the year 1650 BC, there was a great volcanic eruption in the Mediterranean. This eruption was so immense that it blanketed the island of Santorini in about 200 feet of ash. It killed every life form on the island and utterly obliterated the city-state that had been living there, a part of the Minoan civilization. This is important to know for one key reason. The great Greek philosopher Plato wrote about a place called Atlantis around 360 BC. That was 1,300 years after Santorini was devastated by the eruption. In his writings, Plato described Atlantis as having been a highly advanced city that had once besieged Athens with an immense naval force. The Minoans could fit that description. Shortly after, the island was punished by the gods for their selfish and greedy ways and sank. Ever since Plato wrote these words, people have been trying to figure out if Atlantis was a real place or not. The actual location of Atlantis has been hugely debated, with some saying it was near the Caribbean, others Antarctica, the Greek islands, Morocco, it could be anywhere. Ancient objects discovered in 2020 from the days before Santorini's city-state was destroyed point to Santorini being the location of Atlantis. Archaeologists agree that the culture on the island flourished 3,000 years ago, but some researchers believe the culture was around way before that, and that this was a major civilization. When researchers began combing through the buried structures looking for artifacts, they found incredible frescoes decorating the walls of the homes. And while the frescoes are mostly destroyed, it's not impossible to see what they had once depicted. In many of these pictures, there are clearly exotic animals, bright flowers, and everything showing a literal paradise. These frescoes alone are enough to suggest Atlantis could have been on the island of Santorini. The Vindolanda Fort. The Vindolanda Fort in England was a Roman auxiliary barracks near Hadrian's Wall. This was at the furthest reach of the Roman Empire. Hadrian's Wall marked the boundary between the empire and what they considered being the barbaric tribes living beyond, tribes that the Romans never conquered. The fort itself was built sometime around the year 85 AD and was occupied until the year 370. You can think of it as a garrison of troops set up at the end of the Roman world to protect Roman Britain from an attack by the tribes living in what is today Scotland. And while the fort has been known to archaeologists for decades, something new has just been discovered. Retired biochemist Dylan Herbert was volunteering at the Vindolanda Fort doing some research when he accidentally discovered a carved phallus. This carved human organ was quite large and came included with an insult carved into the stone over it. It's believed the Roman graffiti was left behind by a soldier stationed here and was intended for another soldier. The insult is too lewd to be repeated here, but it's the same thing you could find these days written on any bathroom stall. Researchers say graffiti hasn't really changed at all since the Roman times. They were the first to draw giant phalluses as a hobby and leave behind rude insults for their fellow soldiers. Petra breakthrough. In a surprising new discovery, archaeologists have come across an ancient scroll in the city of Petra. You might recognize Petra as the lost city in the desert carved directly into the stone. The ruins go back over 2,000 years, and even though the area has been studied since the 1800s, there are new things to be discovered. Archaeologists have uncovered a document that had been forgotten inside a cave in Petra that dates back 2,000 years, just like the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. But in this case, this scroll isn't full of religious texts or the details of secret rituals. Instead, it gives information about the life of a Nabatean woman by the name of Abi Adan. She lived in the 1st century AD and had traveled to Petra from the Dead Sea in search of opportunities and a better life. Professor Hannah Cotton Peltiel of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is an expert on the scrolls and says that she had an orchard of date trees near the Dead Sea that she was selling. Reportedly, they were right next to the lands of the Nabatean king himself, meaning they were well taken care of and in a good neighborhood. The documents prove that she knew how to read and write and could own property. She may have been a wealthy and influential woman in the kingdom, and these scrolls are official legal documents, not just scribbles. Professor John Healy from the University of Manchester said that in the kingdom of Nabatea, it seems women could own and transfer property and had agency, unlike women in many other parts of the ancient world. In Greece and Rome, women were not equals under the law, but here women could be in the company of men and could divorce and serve as witnesses in court cases. The city of Petra was at the heart of Nabatean culture. These people accumulated a massive amount of wealth by trading on the Silk Road. This was a major hub for caravans, traveling merchants, and all kinds of traders from many different cultures would come here to live. Jealousy in the neighboring empires of Greece and Rome led to warfare, and although the Greeks were unsuccessful, the Romans defeated the Nabateans about 400 years later. Then, after 250 years of occupation, the Roman Empire deserted Petra, and it was lost for centuries. The settlement of Shol. In Mexico, the ancient Maya settlement of Shol was recently uncovered for the first time in history. This amazing settlement, located only a handful of miles from downtown Mérida, the capital of the Yucatan Peninsula, was once a thriving hub. Researchers dated it to being occupied between 600 and 900 AD, making the buildings more contemporary than in other Maya cities such as Uxmal or Chichen Itza. Since the discovery of Shol a few years ago, more and more things have been found here. In 2020, over 38 burials were detected, lost on the outskirts of the city, with the graves filled with ritual offerings. And more recently, 7 new buildings were found. These buildings are nothing but ruins, but archaeologists found the scraps of the material that had been used to build them. And interestingly enough, the material used to build these structures came from pretty far away. The researchers identified scraps of volcanic rock which had been brought from Guatemala. This shows that even near the end of the Maya Empire, they had a sophisticated network that could transport huge loads of material from one end of the kingdom to the other. And they used this network to build great cities, right until a massive drought caused the Maya Empire to collapse around 1,000 years ago. Big shout out to Franklin and Neil Jackson. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. More Sakara mummies. Archaeologists working in the ancient Egyptian cemetery at Sakara have just discovered even more mummies. Not just a few, but hundreds of ancient Egyptian coffins, as well as fantastically preserved bronze statues of various Egyptian gods. Gods such as Anubis, Amun, Osiris, Isis, Bastet, and Hathor. They even found a headless statue of the pharaoh Imhotep, who handled the construction of the Sakara pyramid. According to the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, they found 250 coffins and 150 bronze statues. These objects all date back to the late period of Egypt, around 500 BC. The archaeologists even found ancient musical instruments. They discovered a sistrum, which was a percussion instrument that kind of looked like a torture device. It was used during religious ceremonies and whenever it was believed that a deity had been summoned during a ritual. As for the coffins, they were pretty standard for this era in Egyptian history. They were painted wooden coffins, with each one containing its very own mummy. One carving even contained a papyrus written in hieroglyphics. Researchers believe it is a fragment of the legendary Book of the Dead, a tool used by Egyptian priests to help spirits move on to the underworld. Pompei human genome. The ancient city of Pompei just keeps revealing more and more secrets. Even though the city was discovered by archaeologists many years ago, researchers are still finding more amazing things buried in the rubble from when the city was destroyed. As you probably know, Pompei was the city unfortunate enough to be in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius when it erupted in 79 AD. The volcanic ash blanketed the city, petrifying people in blocks of stone as if they had been in a staring contest with Medusa. But this newest discovery isn't exactly archaeological. What scientists have done now is successfully sequence the very first genome of a victim of the Mount Vesuvius eruption. Researchers looked at the remains of 2 individuals who were discovered in a building called the House of the Craftsman. This building was uncovered right in the center of Pompei, basically downtown. They took DNA from these people, distilled it, and sequenced the genomes. One skeleton had fragments missing from its genome, but the other was a major success. Scientists now know that this victim was a man between 35 and 40 when he died. They also know he shared very similar DNA to modern Italians. This guy is probably somebody's direct relative living in Italy right now. The lost colonists. In August 1587, a group of roughly 115 English settlers arrived off the coast of North Carolina on Roanoke Island. This was a new colony in the New World, and these were some of the very first people from Europe to ever lay their eyes on North America. The leader and governor of the new colony was a man named John White. John sailed back to England and was planning to load up on fresh supplies and return soon after. But because war had broken out between England and Spain, he didn't make it back to the colony until August 1590. That was 3 years later. And when he got there, expecting to find the colonists and his wife and daughter, they were gone. There was no trace of them. There were no bodies, and the only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. For the last almost 500 years, historians have been trying to figure out what happened to the colonists of Roanoke Island. And finally, it looks like we have some answers. Recent archaeological excavations on Hatteras Island have allegedly solved the case. According to project leader Scott Dawson, he and his team uncovered proof that the colonists hadn't simply vanished. They had actually been taken in by the Croatoan natives to live with them peacefully on a different island. The colonists were never lost. They'd simply moved on and integrated themselves with the natives. The evidence for this comes in lost European artifacts on the island from the 16th century: an Elizabethan rapier, a writing table with English letters, and other ordinary objects. The only thing that's missing are the actual colonists. A Hasmonean farming complex. Archaeologists in Israel have just come across a fascinating agricultural complex from about 2,000 years ago. This complex can be traced back to the Hasmonean period. The Hasmoneans ruled over all of Judea and the surrounding regions from roughly 140 BC until 37 BC. It was when King Herod the Great came to power that Judea turned into a vassal state of Rome and the dynasty ended. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, this new complex was found in eastern Galilee. Inside the ruins of the structure, archaeologists found dozens of old tools, things once used for plowing and tending to crops. They even found weights that had once been used for weaving fabrics, along with several coins from about 2,200 years ago. All of this stuff appears to have just been left behind, which suggests that whoever lived here fled abruptly when the Hasmoneans came to the area and conquered it. Alexandria's sunken treasures. In the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast of Egypt's Alexandria, a warship has just been found. This ship was from ancient Greece and sank thousands of years ago in Alexandria's Abu Qir Bay. Even more amazing is the fact that the ship was discovered buried underneath an ancient funerary temple. This temple dates back to the 4th century BC and was once part of the port city of Tanis Heraklion. The city of Tanis Heraklion was destroyed about 2,000 years ago by an earthquake and the tsunami that came after. The city was standing one day, and the next it had completely collapsed into the Mediterranean. An entire city just wiped off the map in a single day. It looks like the ship was actually destroyed when the funerary temple collapsed sideways onto it. This temple must have been at the very edge of the city, right beside the port. When its enormous stone blocks started falling apart, the thing tipped over and landed on a boat. Then both of them sank and were eventually covered by about 15 feet of solidified mud, along with the rest of the city. Stonehenge Land Use. Geophysical sensors, powerful computers, and new excavations have revealed fascinating insights into Stonehenge. Not the henge itself, but the land where it sits. Researchers from the University of Birmingham found what appeared to be prehistoric pits, several hundred of them, scattered across the landscape near Stonehenge. A large pit dug into the chalky bedrock stands out as the oldest trace of land use discovered. They also found several thousand much smaller pits that look like boreholes. Think of these as empty holes in the ground after a fence post has been taken out. These mysterious holes were discovered by completing a geophysical survey. The scientists used electromagnetic induction to reveal anomalies in the ground. They also used a computer to generate thousands of subsurface features, like these mysterious pits. But what does all this mean? The pits come from around 10,000 years ago and 3,300 years ago. That means they range from the early Mesolithic to the Middle Bronze Age. People had been living at this exact spot all along the outskirts of Stonehenge for a period of around 7,000 years, maybe even more. The pits were probably dug as hunting traps. They would have been used by the hunters to trap red deer and wild boar, and even the extinct aurochs. This fresh evidence goes to show that way before Stonehenge was one of the first observatories ever made, the land was bustling with nomadic, cave-dwelling hunters. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!